Recording live from the Hoban Law Group here in Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Eric Singular. We're sitting alongside President and founder of the Hoban Law Group, Bob Hoban. Today we are talking about the keys to cannabis industry legitimization, and we are joined by the Chief Operating Officer of Gateway Proven Strategies, Ceci Zak. Ceci, thanks for joining us again on the Hoban Minute.
Thank you, Eric. It's a distinct pleasure to be here today, and really look forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we kind of want to pick up on where the conversation left off last time, which is what is it going to take to really get this industry to, permeate into what we call or think about sometimes as the institutional realm, right? So institutional players, institutional capital. This industry so far just has not really attracted the attention, or it's on the cusp of attracting the attention of the big players out there. And I'm wondering, that's kind of where I want to jump in with you today, is what is it going to take on our side as the cannabis industry to continue moving toward that, that real carved out position in as a major global commodity?
Well, first, we have got to understand what it's going to take and then change the behavior to create an accepted industry globally. And that means an accepted industry where there's norms and the value proposition is understood that can drive a global demand that is exponentially larger than what we're seeing today. And to do that, there's a lot of thought that needs to go into what acceptance means and who are the key stakeholders. And it all starts with standardization. I think the challenges that everyone has in the industry is that the laws in one jurisdiction is completely different than another. But if there's ways to evaluate how to standardize the way products are sold, how they're marketed, their price points, truly understanding where the supply is coming from a compliance perspective. Once we start to standardize these and think about that and tell the real story, I fundamentally believe that that's going to drive policy and it's going to drive the growth that we're all looking and hoping to achieve in this global environment.
Well, and just to really dig into standardization, it seems like we barely even have standardization in the United States around these products. It's just, like you said, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, it is variable. And I think, what we're thinking about is global standardization to a certain extent. How are you going to move around, whether it's the raw material, the raw supply around the planet, or if it, finished consumer goods, et cetera. So Bob, let's have you jump in here a little bit and talk about where are we at with standardization in the United States versus getting to standardization at the global level. We've talked a little bit about the UN and their role to play in that perhaps, but let's jump in there.
Well, it's an interesting topic because at the end of the day, standardization means one thing, but I think when people look to standards, they first look at the legal elements of it. What is legal? So it's misunderstood, I think, across the board that certain elements of this industry in the United States are 100% legal, and that certain elements of the marijuana industry globally are also 100% legal. It's easy for these companies, particularly companies that have headquarters here in the U.S., to look at cannabis and think about Snoop Dogg and think about marijuana and say that this is illegal. So they didn't even get to the standardization question. They just get to the idea that, is this going to cause me trouble? Are my board of directors and my investors, if you're a publicly traded company, can you even engage in a business that is in fact illegal? So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding. Plus, I think the other thing that goes towards this is the industry too small? Is it too small? The people don't seem to pay attention to it. When I say the people, I mean Fortune 500 companies, large-scale consulting, and large-scale businesses that are global in scope. They don't seem to know that this is an industry that right now, as we're sitting here in this studio, is over $25 billion in value when you take the hemp side and the marijuana side and you add global fixtures into that. I don't think they know that. So those are the things that need to get over the hump. Then you get to standardization. This is the problem with the cannabis industry. People from within the industry want to create brand new standards for everything. Ceci, standards exist already, right? For everything.
They do. You're right. I guess. And then,
but it's not to say that standardization isn't required, but it's taking those standards and adopting those in the industry. Think about FDA standards for a second. The FDA. Well, the FDA standards exist. They apply to supplements. They apply to food products. They apply to drugs and cosmetics. Now, those are standards that are generally accepted. And of course, there's private market and trade group standards that exist that dovetail with those. But for some reason, the industry seems to think like it needs to come up with its own standards. And yes, technically, scientifically, there are standards that need to be established that are specific to the compounds that come from the cannabis plant. But don't standards already exist out there? The industry has just been reluctant, perhaps, to adopt them?
It's a great point, Bob. And I think there's two things I want to address. The first is your point around people or big enterprises wanting to get into the industry, and they feel inhibited by the law. And that's where they first go to figure out should they or shouldn't they not play in this industry. So it's almost like the go, no-go decision is based on what the laws are in the jurisdiction that they may or may not want to play in. And I argue that that is an extremely myopic view of this because the laws are changing all the time, and it's the perception of what a global enterprise company has been looking at for most of their existence, one shoe fits all sizes in whatever geography, whatever country they're in. And I would argue that it's the big enterprises that are the ones that are going to have to help shape what the legal policies are in these countries, especially in the United States. And I would love nothing more than seeing food and beverage and packaged goods and clothing manufacturers come to the table and really drive the policy change that needs to happen from whatever way it will make it easier for them to play in that game. And I think the other piece to this is that, yes, there are standards that are out there that people aren't adhering to as well. And, the one that the two of you know that's very passionate to me is those brands that are out there making claims that fly in the face of the FDA regulations as it relates to health and wellness. And I find it absolutely unexcusable that any brand is out there today thinking that they can market by saying that their product is going to cure coronavirus. And to me, that's an immediate standardization that's out there that has to be heeded by CEOs of these brands.
But that topic doesn't just talk about standards, although it certainly does. It talks about the professionalism and the sort of understanding or the awareness, perhaps the self-awareness of the industry itself. So talk a little bit about that from your perspective. Professionalism is a broad category. What are the items that fall under that based on your observations also need to improve for this industry to gain more widespread attention, institutional investors, institutional attachment?
Yeah, and as the both of you know, I come from big enterprise, primarily pharmaceutical background. So I've grown up in that world where that professionalism is, the cost of entry, which I know is not the cost of entry for the cannabis industry. But I think it starts with people's behaviors and their code of conduct to help change the perception of the industry and not being, a pothead type of mentality. But it really is around health and wellness and the other benefits that it brings. And so I think just even starting with the terminology is something that can help. The second piece is around the business savvy, is really understanding whoever you are in this industry, where do you fit in the ecosystem? Where do you fit in the supply chain? Because way too often, I've seen from clients that there's business plans that just, they don't know how to follow the dollar. They don't know where they're going to be able to grow instead 6-12 months to boost their bottom line. And, those two things in itself are challenges for investors to feel confident that this great idea or this innovator in cannabis has a product or a technology that's worth investing in today. The other piece is around being fiscally astute. So not just the business savvy, but being fiscally astute and understanding exactly what the costs of things are going to be and making sure they know their network first before they go and raise money, but that they really understand that flow of where they are in the ecosystem, where they're getting their supply from, what are the best capital decisions that they can make versus just making a decision and just spending the money. And I think those three things alone would be a great advancement to help with the acceptance of this industry.
Well, and I think those things were important before COVID. Now they're probably even more important with the if there was an abundance of capital maybe a year ago, it seems like now it's going to be very difficult for companies to go and raise capital. So the financial astuteness plays a much bigger role. I want to come back to something that Bob raised and put it to you, which is the industry too small to capture the attention of the Fortune 500, the Fortune 100 companies? And I don't know, I have I sense that at one part of the spectrum, but then on the other, I think, well, the industry needs those companies to come in and advance it. You think about, there isn't decortication for hemp in the United States. There isn't a processing infrastructure for the fiber. And a lot of these companies sit back and say, we'll wait another 5 or 10 years until it's there, and then we'll get involved. But don't they need to get involved now? Don't they need to help build the infrastructure to really get this whole industry off the ground? A lot in there, but over to you.
Yeah, and Eric, you bring up so many great points in those comments. And, I've been working with a company that's looking to integrate hemp strategically into their plan 5 and 10 years out. And they're looking to use it for sustainability purposes, whether it's for commercial products, and this is hemp, whether it's commercial products like a toothbrush, or whether it's clothing, or for packaged goods. How can we replace the plastics that are out there today, or the paper cardboard that's out there today? And it's going to take 3 to 5 years before they can say we can operationalize this, but they need to step in now if we're going to make the change. And I'm also very passionate about hemp because now that I've been in the industry, hemp is just an extraordinary product. It's not a product, and I know, Bob, you're going to give me the word that it is, but there's so many uses for it that can help create a better bottom line from a profitability perspective, can create new global commercial opportunities by new brands, new portfolio of brands, especially for the socially responsible. And it can totally help with sustainability plans that your Fortune 500 companies are putting in play based on global and UN standards about how can they be sustainable by 2030.
Now, you make some good points. And, one of the things that I observe quite often is a fear from the folks within the industry that it's going to get taken over by big pharma or big tobacco or big Fortune 500 interests, whatever the case might be. And it's that type of fear that really has caused the industry to guard itself, kind of like that image you might think of people eating in prison where you lean over your food and you put your elbows real wide so nobody takes your mashed potatoes. That's what the industry does to itself to prevent people from the outside coming in. But it does need to change because, to your point, this is a health and wellness category. The industry itself is beginning to realize it is, because that's what fits into these mainstream product producers and CPG manufacturers around the world. But at the end of the day, is that necessary, or can the industry protect itself? Does the industry need to protect itself, or does it need the outside to come in and so-called legitimize it?
I first of all, I really hope the outside industry comes in. That's why I've joined this industry myself, is to help them understand the value proposition it has for the whole world and humanitarian efforts, and for the planet, for that matter. And I do believe, though, that just based on the time that I've been here and doing the research, that big industry does need to come in, because they've got the pockets that can help with policy reform. They've got the deep pockets that can help with research. And, we talk about even just hemp processing. And I know there's a big gap right now as it relates to, being able to process the plant in a way that you utilize the hemp plant to its maximum capacity, which is extraordinary. But the perceptions are the thing, Bob, that is... the perceptions out there by these big companies are just not factual. And when I talk to heads of innovation of a very well-known clothing sporting good, and the head of innovation says, well, hemp uses more water than cotton. And, I've learned from all of you that that's just not true. And yet they're making decisions on not strategically evaluating hemp for products, sneakers or clothing or whatever it may be, because it's using too much water, and it's just not the truth. And so, I'm making it a passion play on myself to help educate everyone out there about the benefits.
We talk about what the industry could do better to advance, to bring in folks that can advance it. But what can outside interest, institutional interests, if you will, what can they do better? Because my observation is oftentimes folks from corporate America or mainstream institutional enterprise that's global in focus, they come in like the big boss man and say, we're going to come in and make this better. You people don't know what you're doing. And I think that's a fundamental flaw. So how do you temper that? Because this is not an industry like any other. I hate to say it. You can't run it through the same metrics and measurements and evaluation that you would other emerging industries. You just can't. Now, it makes it unique, but it doesn't keep it off limits. How do you balance that?
So in my mind, I think it creates a competitive advantage for an industry, a leader in an industry, if they take an interest in this industry, to figure out how they can influence it and grow it in a way that will help them 5-10 years down the line. If I just look at, the evaluation that we've been doing on CPG companies, it would take quite a bit of time for them to use hemp to replace a plastic bottle. However, it just takes one company to demonstrate their interest, and now they're at a significant competitive advantage than anyone else in the marketplace. They can use that in so many different ways that will ultimately, they can be the leader as it relates to CBD development, as it relates to hemp development, whatever it may be. Even in those that really want to look at THC as being a component of a physician's armamentarium for health and wellness. GW has done that, but they're the only ones. There's not many else out there that I know about. There's a handful of big pharma that are out there, but it just takes one major player, and for them to believe in it and utilize that as a competitive advantage. And then I think that's where the acceptance starts.
So many of these companies, as we point out, they sit on the sidelines. They wait for things to develop to a certain point. They wait for the regulatory or the legal clarity that they would desire for a variety of reasons. Why shouldn't they wait, right? Why can't they sit back and wait for the clarity that they require from the FDA or otherwise, or anywhere they're operating, and then with their resources and their infrastructure, just come in and become a major player regardless? Why is the time now?
Well, there's a couple questions in there, Bob, and I'm going to start with why should they wait? And I would argue that no one should wait when it comes to this industry, and that's because innovation takes trial and error. And that's where I think, big enterprises have the opportunity, and they've got the resources to create a trial and error, because if you're moving down the football field, you're not going to get there in one straight line unless someone gets a Hail Mary or has a run back. And in this situation, you are going to go forward and you're going to go backwards. And so the one that ends up crossing the finish line is going to have that competitive advantage. So to me, that's why they shouldn't wait. And I forgot the second question. I got you.
Second question. Why now? Why?
Why now?
I think you hit it actually. Let me do a 2-second pause and then I'll come in. I gotta. Ceci, I gotta come back to the cotton versus hemp thing, because I just, I think Bob and I cringed, to hear that somebody thought that hemp used more water than cotton. And, this kind of highlights the need for spreading, real education about this plant. And it also comes back to the standardization piece, right? Because there is, while we know that hemp does use less water, it's difficult to actually produce, proof, from a university, an accredited university here in the United States, and say, here is the raw data that shows it was this much water to produce this much hemp versus this much water for this much cotton. I think it's all coming, but that's going to create the standards that then will help inform the industry. I want to ask you this, though, because education is such an important topic. It comes up all the time on this podcast, all the time in this industry. You do consulting work. I'm wondering, with the work that you do, when you do consulting for different organizations, how much do you feel like you have to educate them in the work you're doing on cannabis? Are they very familiar, or do you work with a lot of clients who you're kind of picking up the torch and you're the person who's having to tell them about the value proposition of this plant?
It all starts with education, because everyone's perception is completely different, because there is no standardization. There's no acceptance, of the industry at a macro level, whereby there is a consistent educational component to what marijuana is, to what hemp is. And the challenge is helping the client recognize that their perception is not the reality. And so it all starts with education. And, with some clients, we start with Cannabis 101 and help break down, that there's marijuana and then there's hemp, and then help them understand, what marijuana is and what hemp is, and do a 101 with them. And that takes quite a bit of time, because there are nuances that, even I struggled with when I came into, the industry, and if I'm a lay person, that's how I'm starting to educate these people with, what do I wish that I had when I came into the industry, to help them understand the facts, but just as importantly, the value proposition. And, it's extraordinary what hemp can do, and the various types of textiles and products out there. And, I'm envisioning a flow chart by Renee Johnson that I just viewed, and it was, I got blown away by all of the uses of hemp.
So you look at the food supply chain and how it seems to be impacted by our COVID pandemic scenario. And you look at the fact that there's allegedly going to be an interruption in our meat supply. Meat is certainly favored by Americans in many circles, in most circles, but it's the protein from a nutritional standpoint. And if you look at industrial hemp, to your point, how does a company that is a major food supply company even become aware that the protein from hemp is, the content is off the charts relevant to other plant material, and it's been used to solve protein deficiencies around the world? How do you get that message through in a short period of time? To your point, somebody who produces textiles doesn't understand the water usage between cotton and hemp. They just get it backwards, and that causes them to make a poor business decision. But how do you even get the idea that hemp protein should be on the table for major food manufacturers or mood manufacturers around the world? How do you even get that on their plate?
It's a great question. You just gave me a whole new target client profile for us to target. It's all about education and getting the word out there. And, one of the things that you're making me realize is that there's an opportunity to use these virtual educational pieces, such as your podcast, as an opportunity to maybe even start educating people on this. So I don't have a succinct answer for you, Bob, but you gave me an idea that I'd like to do for our company going forward about how to educate in food. So.
As Bob does so well, planting the seeds, if you will. Ceci, it's such a pleasure to have you on the Hoban Minute again. This is a topic that we'll just continue to dig into, and it's exciting. I think Bob brings up there's some fear, there's some reluctance for the big players, the big guys to come in. I think the industry kind of needs it. And I think that's kind of the takeaway, and I don't know. I understand why there's some trepidation there, but also see the value in it. And the work that you're doing, I think, is extremely valuable to make that happen. There's also a rumor that Ceci may be starting her own podcast, so be on the lookout for that. And Ceci, thank you for joining us again on the Hoban Minute.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Hoban Minute special series on coronavirus and cannabis. You can head on over to Hoban.law for more information on this podcast or the Hoban Law Group. If you have any ideas for subjects that we should be covering or any questions you want to pose to Bob or myself, shoot us an email at media@Hoban.law. And stay tuned for the next episode on this special series, Coronavirus and Cannabis.